G'day there, ladies and gents of the internet. Mark Wallace here from Econisis. Hope you're all doing well. It is the middle of October 2023, and I want to have a quick video today talking about the economic implications of the recent no vote at the Voice referendum. Some of these concepts will be very new to people, including people who voted no, and that I think is a failure on the part of the Yes campaign to really prosecute the reality of what a no vote would mean for Australia. I think there was a presumption, and particularly by political commentators, that we were already living in the no environment, and that by voting no, nothing was going to change. But we were actually voting in the pre-yes component as part of a 40-year-long political reconciliation process. And now that the vote has been no, and no has been soundly defeated, no has soundly won, and yes has been soundly defeated in the referendum. What I think people don't realise is the political reconciliation process is now over. We were no longer in a political reconciliation process. There was no plan B because the reconciliation process was leading to the Voice. And so now that that's been rejected, we will no longer have a political reconciliation process that involves the people of Australia. We're sidelined now. We're out of this. The reality is that we'll now move to what is likely to be a political, a court-imposed black sovereignty type of solution, in which we move away from the New Zealand-style model of the iwi with the treaty, which is what was originally being approached, and with the iwi and the people in New Zealand Maoris living within the sort of wider community, to I think an increasing approach that'll be very similar to that of the US and the Native Americans, which is a much more of an independent sovereignty movement where the land is there is wholesale land that moves to Aboriginal custody as sovereign First Nations. Now, this may seem like a scare campaign that a no put forward as like what would happen if we voted yes. Ironically, the yes was designed to prevent this. And again, not something was argued very well or if at all by the yes campaign, which was the argument, and the law within Australia, thanks to Mabo, is that we recognise that First Nations sovereignty was not extinguished by the colonisation of Australia by the British and the subsequent formation of the Commonwealth of Australia. The First Nation sovereignty continues to exist, and that we've had a system of land allocation and land distribution through native title for a little while now in response to that, to Mabo and the decisions around that. But true independence and Aboriginal sovereignty has never really been part of the process, even though that, to some degree, for some activists, has always been the logical conclusion that has been reached. Because there was always an investment on the side of the Aboriginal community into the reconciliation process. So I think now that that's ended and the Australian voters have ended that reconciliation process, we're going to be moving to, you're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years, a number of court cases which will establish the precedent of full Aboriginal First Nations sovereignty. And that will put Aboriginal people in the position of effectively being dual citizens, just like Native Americans are in America, being citizens of both the country in Australia, because it's well established that all Aboriginal people are Australian citizens, but they'll also be citizens of their sovereign First Nation. And that sovereign First Nation will exist as and will have its history from an English common law perspective dating back to prior to colonisation, meaning that they will be operating outside of the Constitution. What that fundamentally means is that a treaty will therefore be required, but it'll be a treaty under very different circumstances. And the Australian government will, under no circumstances, Labor or Liberal, go to the point of where they will take this to the voter ever again. So when that happens, in the short term, the biggest loser of that is going to be the state governments, because what this will result in is the wholesale shift of mining leases over to Aboriginal First Nations communities once they're declared sovereign. And so as a result of that, there's billions of dollars, about $270 billion a year. And if that does wholesale go over to Aboriginal communities and there isn't a treaty that brings Aboriginal First Nations into the wider economic system once their sovereignty is declared, then that's taxes up for everybody. And so that's one of the big economic implications. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think you'll absolutely see treaties go through. We already have treaty negotiations by most of the states, and this is why. This is the main implication. Why is because of land security around mining leases and mining-related economic implications. So absolutely we're going to see that come to fruition, and no state government is ever going to take this to the population again, because they've demonstrated the voters, particularly older voters, can't be trusted with an issue as important as this. So that will basically, they'll do a run around of the voter now, because, yeah, as I said, the voter won't the politicians will not allow voters to choose to sacrifice that amount of much money. Even older populations or older generations, they won't let the older generations sacrifice the younger generations for the sake of their own either ignorance or racism. So in order to do that, so that's the big one. In the short term, it's going to be a massive sovereign risk issue for mining resource investment, just as the time when we need significant investment in critical minerals. We've already starting to see this flow through some of the media now, of that it's effectively quadrupled the risk profile, sovereign risk profile of Australia as an investment destination. Because if you're an overseas mining company or a mining investment company that's investing in a mining lease, how do you know within the next 10 years that the Commonwealth Government, who you have that mining lease, will actually in fact be the rightful owner of that land, when in fact it could vest with that of the of an Aboriginal First Nations sovereign country or sovereign entity? So there's a huge sovereign risk issue now that's embedded within the mining sector and mining investments in Australia. And we're already seeing commentary coming through that internationally around this issue. On the international front, we're also going to see some pretty serious implications already. We've had a number of Asian countries, India, Southeast Asian countries, China, Japan, even South Korea, commenting about the fact that, can we really trust Australia as a partner anymore? If Australia can't come to terms with the reality of of our history and of our relationship with our First Nations brothers and sisters, can we actually in fact trust them with partners? Now, this will be used as a cudgel, absolutely, and will be used to reinforce existing views that were always, in my opinion, somewhat unfair. But it's really hard to argue against some of those views that Australia is an inherently racist and discriminatory country to countries like Asian countries, where that's already had an element of view within the wider zeitgeist, and this is just very overt evidence that that's in fact the case. So unfortunately, that's going to have some implications. The big ones I think are going to be on international education. You're going to see a massive pullback on that. You're going to see some slowly decisions changes now with regard to things like the China unwinding some of their onerous trade restrictions. I think you're not going to see as many countries around the world pushing back on China as much to unwind some of those things now, because Australia's a really hard party now to go to bat for in these issues than it was, say, even a few weeks ago when this was, when we hadn't reaffirmed to all these countries that we were quote unquote a racist country, which is now the prevailing view in the media. And so what we have going forward is very much tourism is another one, and obviously the other big one is going to be around the European and other free trade agreements. There'll be a real slowly. European Commission had previously stated that if it didn't pass, it probably would put the free trade agreement with the EU on hold somewhat indefinitely, because Australia couldn't be seen as a legitimate human rights partner within this. So there's significant economic opportunity costs associated with that. So, look, some big implications coming through. Some of this stuff will take 10, 15, 20 years to work its way through, and we'll go down the same path that Brexit has gone down, which is once the reality of the lies and the misinformation comes to bear, you'll have people who are, older people particularly, who sort out to, conspiracy theories to build their own views to hide inherent racism, or just their fear of the fact that the world in which they live in is far too complicated for them to understand, because obviously of their baby boomers have a significantly below average level of education. So now that that's happened, the reality is outside of that group, everybody else, the regret will start to kick in, and unfortunately there's nothing we can do about it. Australian population's out of the game now. Reconciliation is over and is no longer taking place, and so now it will be a very different environment that we'll be working in, and that will have economic implications, potentially multi-generational economic implications. Does it sound familiar about multi-generational economic implications? Yeah, unfortunately we are stuck in one generation who is definitely causing some pretty serious economic implications and impacts on younger generations. But this is just another example of that, unfortunately, today. But that is it for today. Hopefully that gives you some interesting insights as to what the next little while is going to be, short, medium and long term, and the implications that the vote is going to have from an economic perspective on Australia's competitiveness, international relationships, and our risk profile in the global market. But that is it for today. Thank you so much. Hope you'll have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you soon.